is that only 17% of borrowers go back to the same lender.
What's called the berry button, big red button that I hit.
Hey, remember that?
Right?
And, oh yeah, I love.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another edition of Laugh, Lend, and Eat the podcast. And so glad that I'm able to have a friend of mine on here. He is the founder of Wake Coaching, and it's no one other than Bill Bent himself, coming in from Colorado. How are you, Bill?
Doing wonderful, Bobby. Thank you very much.
So, Bill, we were just talking before the show, and admission to everybody that's listening is Bill is in Colorado, and they're 2 hours behind the East Coast where I'm located. And whatever happens, for some known reason in my mind, I always admit the 2 hour time zone. And I go from 1 hour back to 3 hours back. And how many other states, I don't know if you know this or not, Bill, but how many other states are in that 2 hour mountain time? Is that called mountain time zone? Is that what it's called?
Correct, mountain time zone. I couldn't tell you right off the top of my head how many states, but it's going to cover basically the Continental Divide mountains all the way down into, from New Mexico all the way up into Montana.
What about like Arizona? Is Arizona in there?
Arizona, half the year is. So Arizona goes half the year Pacific and half the year mountain.
Man, that's got to be a tough life out there.
Exactly.
They don't know which way to go. So, Bill, listen, you had a very, we're not going to talk about time zones, guys, so let's move on from there. But you've had a very, an amazing career. I think that's a proper way to say it, in the mortgage business. And I know you're now moving onward into your next chapter of your life. And that's what we're going to talk about that. Obviously, we can't forego all the years that you did the mortgage side. Mm-hmm. And I know that, I want to read your entire resume, but one of the big things that I really focused on when I was going through this is the amount of development of actual mortgage companies that you were part of, right? That you were able to kind of take and build and scale up, which a lot of us that are in the mortgage business are involved in scaling up, and the challenges that are involved in something like that, right? So to me, I want to start off with your venture, your time at Academy Mortgage, right? Because that to me is one of the most highlights of your career from what I saw, at least from my perspective. You might have a different view on that, right? But you really took that company from 130 people to 2,300 people, which when you really, if you're in this position that people like you and I are in, you understand the massive challenge that encompasses. So really would like you to, just share with the audience, how did you, come across being introduced to Academy back in the day, and then the challenge that you faced to really scale that model up?
Good questions, Bobby. And so one, how the opportunity to meet Academy occurred was I was with 21 years with a Waterfield mortgage company, family owned. During that time period, we became, for a short window, for a couple of years, we were the largest privately owned mortgage company in the industry, serviced almost 200,000 loans and originated on our peak years in the 50,000 loans a year. And then we had a 3.2 asset based bank, 3.2 billion asset based bank. And then once we sold it, I was freed up and I had to figure out what to do. And of course, for anyone in the mortgage industry back then, we all were experiencing with the crash. We all were experiencing going from a 4 trillion a year origination market to a 1.25 trillion a year origination market, and dealing with all the subprime and Alt-A, all the damage we all created together.
Sure.
And so I was out looking around and had quite a few opportunities, and a recruiting friend of mine introduced me to Academy. At the time, they were well known in Utah, but outside of Utah, not known really much at all. And they had a new individual that was taking over running it because the founder ran into very significant health issues. And so if it was only him and he didn't feel he had someone to run it, he would have closed it down or sold off. So the individual running it happened to be a son-in-law, and he was in his later 20s, and it was all kind of new to him. And he wasn't married to how the model worked. He was very open to taking a whiteboard and really restructuring it and allow it to become more scalable. The other aspect of him was he was also had similar thoughts to me. How do we help people develop and optimize their talents and abilities, both within the company and the employees, but how do we help our partners out there, right?
Mhm.
And that's a heart of me. I always think how we help others is a key component to be more valuable and also the ability to grow. So I felt there was a high correlation there culturally with what he desired. And so I went ahead and made the commitment to join them because he did desire to grow it bigger. And even some of the bigger company opportunities, I was concerned I would have significant influence on the culture. And so I was very much culture guy. So once we got going, any of the recommendations I had to re-engineer it, he embraced, and he was excellent at really the project side.
Mhm.
And so it allowed it to become much more scalable. And then the market really cooperated with growing too, because of all the companies going out of business and their branch system, they weren't ready to go out of business. They needed someplace to be. And so the opportunity to bring many groups on board happened in a more robust way than typical. On top of that, the banks were pulling back a little bit from trying to grow in the business.
Sure.
And so the independent mortgage bankers that had adequate capital had a very unique growth opportunity. I just happened to be a participant in it, but also I happened to be with ownership that embraced re-engineering and scaling.
I mean, look, I mean, you're being modest, right? I'm just going to tell you, you're being, because obviously
That's who I am.
I appreciate that, and that's a good quality, and that's why I do appreciate the conversations that I do get to have with you every now and then, right? But in all honesty, I mean, there is a certain amount of attraction or something you're doing that says, hey, I want to work with Academy, I want to be part of what Bill's building, right?
Mhm.
Something had to have happened that, because look, I mean, there's plenty of companies that were out there in that same time period that other people could have gone to. But when you look at this number that's out there of 130 people going to 2,300,
Yeah.
that's exponential growth that any of us would love to experience at any
Right.
point. And you
So-
just don't get that just because you're still in business.
I can help you more tactically on it. So number one, you need leadership that's certainly willing to put in the time and effort, do the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting in the mortgage business is a key component of it. And I was comfortable, doing that heavy lifting. Number two, really need an infrastructure that's scalable. And that certainly comes into technology, policy, procedures, and all the tactical aspects to be scalable and that you can add production headcount without diminishing growth opportunity, and certainly warehouse lines and the ability to get those increased. And so I was able to get all that aligned quickly, mainly though, because the ownership was a father-in-law and son-in-law. The father-in-law was comfortable letting his son-in-law call all the shots, and the son-in-law was comfortable letting me call the shots. So I was able to call the shots, but he backed it up consistently. And we did the necessary re-engineering to allow the growth on a warehouse perspective, to allow the growth on a systematic perspective. When I first joined them, they still were on Point system, and they were using Point, and the database and new applications were only connected to corporate once the loan was locked in.
Wow.
It didn't work.
Yeah. That's a problem there.
That's a problem. And so, that was before the independents were migrating towards internet-based technology. And, and the Encompass world wasn't really existing back then. So I got the company to change quickly. We went through to an LOS system that was internet-based. And in turn, we could see data the minute the loan officer pulled a credit report, the minute a loan officer populated anything in there.
Yeah.
And so, we could really manage resources effectively. The other aspect that I decided was to keep it all distributive retail, not expand into other origination channels. I didn't feel that we had the resources to handle multiple ways to originate because each one's its own animal and each one needs its own level of support. So I got the ownership commitment to grow that way on top of that too, and then also to operate with a centralized model, semi-centralized model, more regionalized from an underwriting closing perspective, and then a decentralized model from a processing perspective. So that way, the sales, really that loan officer function, working with the referral partners and realtors, that component of processing is really a sales function, but it's tied into the operational side. And then building the processing and loan officer assistant teams distributed out in the field, but then on a regional basis, the underwriting closing team, so they can stay on top of the geographic market issues and tied into appraisals or whatever elements of state requirements. And that model then was very plumb for what was going on. Now the models keep shifting though, and so the internet world and consumer direct keeps growing, and technology has improved.
Sure.
So that distributive model isn't spot on for right now. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you raised such a great segue to what I was actually just making little notes here. Like I said to you, sometimes I don't stay with the script that I start off with, right? But you mentioned two words: technology and distributed retail.
Right.
And to me, those are really key in 2021, right? Because we are standing at pretty much what I would call the dawn of the new age. I mean, everyone that I've spoken to in the fintech world, in the mortgage industry, that are seeing what's happening are all saying the same thing, and that it's not a matter of time anymore. It's already happened.
Correct.
Where the loan officers who are leveraging technology are going to outscale the loan officers who no longer leverage technology. And the pace is going to widen way faster than anyone can imagine. What is your take on that?
Yeah. So first, if you go back to when the crash happened, the industry really got reset, and in turn, really the cost of services. When you look at compliance costs, you look at quality initiatives, loan manufacturing quality costs. You look at the amount of eyeballs that look at a loan, and then you look at the LO commission. So the cost structure jumped quite a bit. Technology really had not emerged. And so, it was at the level it was at, but it's continued to emerge, and it's been better embraced by the investors and the regulators. And so the service being provided by ability to get to the consumer directly, it keeps improving from that distributive LO, and that distributive LO all day long has to be there with the current technology. I see the current LO, distributive LO, continuing to be able to be team focused with their way to get into the market and do more business to earn their money. They're not going to earn a lot less money from a W-2 perspective, or they may earn more money from a W-2 perspective. But if you break it down on a per loan basis, I see it coming down. But they're just going to do more business. And if they embrace the technology and do it that way, and that's what they're competing against when lenders are doing fintech and doing direct to the internet, because that cost model certainly is being done at a lower cost point.
And do you think, I mean, and this is, so people who are listening, let's just make sure we understand. Distributed retail in the mortgage industry means retail branches. So if you're a mortgage lender and you have multiple branches throughout the country or throughout the state or wherever you may be, that's called a distributed retail model. Whereas a quote unquote call center model would be a consumer direct model. And so just so people understand the terms that we're sometimes using, we use these terms sometimes people don't always know what we're talking about. So what I'm wondering, Bill, in your view, if I'm looking at a distributed retail model versus a consumer direct model in 2021, based on what you just said, especially the cost piece, right? Because that's really the part that's pushing all of us to embrace technology. I mean, where does this end up? I mean, for the retail loan officer versus a consumer direct loan officer?
I see that distributed retail loan officer continuing what they've had to do in the past, which is really sharpen their knife, that they're really on top of loan details, loan requirements, but they're also very much on top of technology. And they really see how to run their micro business under a larger macro environment. And running that micro business really they become a good delegator and that team builder from that standpoint. So that way they can funnel as much production opportunity through that team and not just rely on only on themselves. And then I see the ability to gain origination from the local market, the realtors, the builders, et cetera. They're not just going to disappear and they still will try to refer business, but they also need to become internet savvy. And they need to be able to generate business off of their past customers and then build other networks out there, whether it's tied into employee bases, whether it's tied into social media and to those networks, so that their name and voice gets continually out there. And then they can compete closer, toe to toe to these consumer direct models and to these fintech models that will continue to try to do it under a lower cost structure.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is great for me because I want to find out if I'm a retail loan officer, because one of the issues that I've seen, being a sales manager at multiple different companies now, right, is where loan officers don't really rely on coaching. They it's not just the mortgage industry. I think every sales industry to a certain extent feels like once you're in it and you've learned the basics, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're like, hey, I don't need any help. I got this, Fab. I can do this. You know what I mean? And then I look at sports athletes and, the Tom Brady's and the Michael Jordans, no matter where they were in their career, they always had coaching. And so where does coaching fit in as far as helping the retail loan officer get to the next level of their career, no matter how many years they've been in the business?
I think, Bobby, you hit on the core point, which is the human, tends to feel comfortable doing on their own. Feels like once they get trained and mentored, they don't need that support and coaching. And then I think the very top performers, whether it's in sports or whether it's in production, whether it's in doing mortgage loans, I think the very top tends to acknowledge that coaching is a high value add, and they continue with that coaching. Because if we're not growing, I'm fully behind this concept. If we're not growing, we're dying. And that coaching element, having that coach, helps from an accountability standpoint, helps for those time periods we're a little off and struggling, helps from that standpoint of really expanding our views on issues and seeing opportunities where maybe we're blocking our ability to see the opportunity because we're not interactive with that coach from that standpoint. And candidly, I do see that most loan officers create their own problems and they create their own blockage to growing and doing better.
Interesting.
And that coach will help them be able to see that, acknowledge it, and change it and move it into a higher space.
So early on, you were talking about helping others being a kind of a core foundation as you were building. And now we're talking about loan officers kind of being their worst enemy. I'm not obviously that's my quote, not your quote, right? I mean, is this where you as the sales manager, as the leader at one time, and even today, kind of say, hey, Fab, look, this is what I see from my view, right? This is what you're doing that's kind of limiting your growth. Is that what you're talking about when you're talking about helping others kind of see what you're able to see?
Yeah, helping them see it, but really rather than telling them the blockage they're seeing, helping them discover the right answer inside of them.
Okay.
And so with that, it's really less telling and it's more asking very pointed, open-ended, empowering questions. So then that way they tap more into the knowledge that's somewhere inside them anyway. They just need help tapping into that genius of them. And that's the heart of coaching.
Yeah, now that is a very great point, because I know sometimes when no matter what side of the conversation I've been on, I've always felt it's never the answers that will cause me to succeed. It's always the questions I'm asking that have caused my success. Right? Because the answers are always there. It's the questions that are guiding me to what I call the great uncovering. Right? So, I mean, could you espouse on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm a certified coach. And so I went through a company called Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, and which is a pretty thorough, very robust coach training program, and to become highly knowledgeable on coaching skills and tactics with that. So through prior to that, though, I was a client of a coach, and I really became very studious of coaching in that process too, to prepare me for it. And so one simple way to be more of a coach as a manager in sales, as a branch manager or as a area manager, regional manager, is to become very adept at, as you listen, number one, heightening your listening skills and really try to listen for the words that aren't being said, but you know their core within that individual you're listening to. And versus listening and applying it to your life, or listening objectively more to their life, trying to intuitively listening. Then what allows you to do is when you converse back to that individual or that team, you can acknowledge and validate, because now they feel like they've been heard. They're going to move closer to a middle ground by acknowledging and validating, and then flipping the switch to the powerful thing that you just mentioned, the open-ended empowering question. When I say open-ended empowering question, though, I'm really talking about not a closed-end question, not a yes or no answer or right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
Because that's allowing them to do their own self-discovery on that issue, to find a better solution that they're not finding internally.
So open-ended, I mean, just so we understand, I mean, because obviously that you know, I mean, leaves a lot of ambiguity in my mind, right? I mean, if there's no right or wrong, good or bad, right? It almost reminds me of a poem by Rumi, by the way. I don't know if you know the great poet Rumi, right? Where he talked about out beyond the fields of right and wrong, there's a place and I'll meet you there. So when we talk about open-ended questions, are we just talking about, hey, Fab, what do you think is holding you back? And then letting me answer that question. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it something more sublime than that?
No, that's a good example right there. And I would tailor it even a little bit further and say, Fab, if you're a client, Fab, as you talk about that, do you see anything that might be holding you back? You know, and through that process, though, people will be better about self-discovering and self-correcting themselves. Now, these coaching-like conversations by a branch manager, area manager, regional, they do take a little more time. But what it's going to do, it's going to diminish the mistakes. And so while up front, it will take more time, over a little longer time period, it actually diminishes the time.
Yeah.
And that coach-like manager just needs to have trust and faith that that will occur. But I'm highly, by statistics, it does occur.
As a manager, do you feel it's important to have a definition of success that both you and the loan officer or the managers agree on? Or is that also open-ended?
I think to have alignment and continuity, to have a defined, agreeable definition of success or goals or whatever key items you want to apply to that, we're going to have metrics to it. Yeah, I think that's vital, because I do think it heightens the alignment.
Right. And it kind of gives us a North Star of like, hey, we've decided on that date that we're going in this direction. And if I'm not helping you in that direction, you need to call me up and say, hey, Fab, this is what we agreed on, and vice versa, if I see you're diverting from that direction. So I do feel like sometimes we all need to have that, you know, agreement per se of this is what success looks like for us as a team, and how do we all get there?
Correct. And really, I like you use the North Star, Polaris. You know, you really have that Polaris star out there, and we have alignment to how we see that, what that's going to be. And so then it allows that as you develop what are the core KPIs, the performance measurements, then it allows you to say, okay, let's use these as milestones, not as the end goal. Let's really make the goals based upon what we're trying to achieve in the activities, the objectives. And then in turn, we'll use the measurements as a milestone, because we'll recognize then whatever we agree to, that we're going to have to continue to shape it, to allow it to shift a little here and there to keep it on track and relevant.
Yeah.
And great point.
Yeah. So from that also, because I got to get back to my question, but this is such a great conversation. I don't want to walk away from it, right? When we start talking about KPIs and all these other variables that we use to measure people, sometimes it does feel like managers do rely on that more than the actual relationship that they may be experiencing with the salesperson. So where I can look at a spreadsheet, I can say, hey, you know what? May just ended. I saw these pull through numbers, blah, 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 blah. You know, Tom, you should be doing this, or Brian, you could be doing this better, without ever really knowing what Tom or Brian were going through in the month of May.
Mhm.
So sometimes I do feel like KPIs and these metrics do become a little bit more of a hazard, whereas you have to know the person. And to your point, I think you deal a lot more with energy and the energy that people are transmitting, and then the energy that you can actually share together, from what I've read, which to me is like one of the most new age way of leadership, is leading through energy, right? And I think that's fabulous, because to me, I think we need to focus on each other more than these numbers sometimes. And so I think for me, I like to find out, what is energy leadership, Bill?
Yeah. Excellent question. And all I can take credit for is finding IPEC, the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching. And the founder of that, a gentleman by the name of Bruce Schneider, went down the path of really discovering the impact of energy from a leadership standpoint. And energy is correlated, highly correlated, basically conceptually the same as another term called consciousness. And he just really understood that there are various levels of energy that we all experience as a human. And he learned and understood that we create our own illusions through our energy level. And so he went about defining energy into 7 levels, from a level 1, the lowest level of energy, to the highest of level 7. And then he really went into that negative energy is really level 1 and level 2.
Okay.
And that level 1 is really victimized. Oh my God, I'm like, why is this all happening to me?
Yeah.
And when we get there, we're not even trying to find a freaking solution. And so when I'm a loan officer and this realtor's calling me out and saying, you totally screwed up this deal, blah, 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 and I'm feeling like victimized, I'm not even trying to focus on the solution, right? So now when I go to a level 2 energy level, now at least I see a solution, because I see this way it has to happen, my way or highway. I'm right, you're wrong. And now I see a single solution, but I'm still negative. I'm still saying we have to do it this way. Once we move up into level 3, 4, and 5 in our daily flow, now we're more productive energy. We're into achievement-based energy. And at level 3, we're really that winner's mindset. I'm going to win. And if you win, great. But if you don't, I did my best. We're being responsible. When we move to that level 4, we're more focused on others winning and supporting. How can I help this realtor do exceptional? And I see even more solutions that way. But then when I go level 5, then we're in a world of abundance. We all win. There's a win in here for all. And we can see a vibrant, even additional ways of solution on the issue. When we can get ourselves to level 6, we now leave our ego and we get into that flow state. And we want to help every person, every loan officer, every manager in the mortgage industry get to that flow state. Well, that flow state is really being synthesized, connected to one. And how to get there really doesn't take that I'm going to be that winner approach. It really takes, I'm going to be that Michelangelo. I'm just going to be the master of being a loan officer.
Yeah.
And supporting. And when you get there, you're going to be very intuitive. You're going to see things multi-dimension, and you're going to be spot on your game. And so this energy approach is really helping people understand this, how they apply it daily, and in turn, how to master themselves in their leadership and their sales too.
How does this energy flow? It feels like when I first read about it and I hear you talking about it, I feel like it goes against human nature. That, you know, like the basic human instinct, which is fight or flight, right? I mean, when I look at that, like, I'm hungry, I need to eat, right? Something as simple as that. I'm not thinking, hey, Bill may be hungry also. I have one Snickers bar, I'll give him half and I'll give him half. that's what you're asking me to basically become of, right? So I mean, it's a journey for you of a human being from that instinct of this is my Snickers bar to I want to make sure Bill's happy also. I want to make sure Bill's family's happy. I'll give him more than half since he's got a wife and kid. I only need a quarter. So we're really fighting some human instincts to get to this next level that you're speaking of.
Mhm.
And clearly it's possible. So I want to make sure people understand it is absolutely possible to get there. And I believe it's possible to get there. I want to know how do you get people there?
Yeah. One, certainly for any individual, they need to buy in. There needs to be belief. We're going to create, we do create our own reality, and based upon our perceptions, how we apply things. Number two, with that belief, there are certain elements that will help confirm that belief tied into energy, which is quantum physics. And quantum physics is the study of small, or the study of matter. And when quantum physics, they continue to study the human body, the human person, and they have scientifically, a few decades ago, they scientifically proven that the body is really spiritual energy.
Mm.
And they were able to dissect the human body to actually the subcell level, because each human's made up of 35 to 37 trillion cells.
Yeah.
And the subcell level gets down to the proton, and they were able to see an energetic wave pattern underneath that.
Amazing.
And that bottom line is energy. So we are a
Yeah.
spiritual being wrapped into this body.
Yeah.
And there's a merging going on of science and psychology-based spirituality, but also tied into religious spirituality. And so with that, though, once you understand that and you buy in, most people I introduce this concept to, most people really then have that innate desire of how do I operate at higher levels?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just an element of it. And I do think, as you mentioned, that fight or flight, et cetera, we're talking about the ego, and individuals we all do have egos, and that's just the manufacture of the body. And I think this is the wrestle match that goes on between, I'll use generic words, good and bad, or between my religious faith view, God and the devil.
Sure.
And that just gets wrapped into this and wrapped into the ego. And we get to that mastery level, that flow state, we kind of let that go.
At what point in your life did you realize this energy flowing, Bill? I mean, so many of us walk around, and to kind of use metaphorically, we're blind to the energy that's all around us, right? We just think, Snickers bars, eat, hungry, right? It's as primate as that. And you're talking something has to have occurred for you to realize there's something greater than just fighting for a Snickers bar.
So what occurred, we all in our lives have things that we go through that we view to not be good, and then things we view very positive that become good. And so I was in a stage of my life of going through something that people call not a good thing, and it was a struggle. I went through divorce. I chose to get divorced. And at the same time, a very good friend of mine that owned and operated a Colorado-based mortgage banker shop, but they were a smaller company. He ended up selling off his company, and then ended up deciding to become a full-time coach. I was not familiar with coaching at that time. I've heard the language, but so he got well trained on it. And then he's the one that introduced me to energy, but he used it under the concept of consciousness, not energy, but the one the same. And it really educated me. And as I'm going through divorce, I realized I was personalizing everything that was occurring. I had 2 sons from my marriage, and they were in school years, elementary and middle when the divorce first happened. And any of their anger or their sadness, I was personalizing it all and taking it all on. Well, this coaching that the gentleman was Al Colleen, the coach, that Al did on me, I really started shifting how I handled all these issues. And then I saw that how to help support them, but without putting it all on my shoulders.
Yeah.
And so then I started shifting how I manage in the mortgage industry. And I really started developing leadership at a better level. And I felt less stuck to the concept of I need another deal, or, or my branch ain't going to make it, or I'm not going to make it. And I felt less stuck to, well, yeah, if we need to cut corners, get this deal in or whatever, sure, let's just get another deal in. I started shifting from that to get very grounded and into a higher leadership approach in the business world, all through the coach, all through introduction to energy, and me shifting how I handle things and doing it less from my natural ego approach.
Is energy leadership only for leaders? I mean, when we're talking, it seems like if you're not a leader, hey, Fab, this is a great podcast, but I'll listen to somebody else. Is this just for leaders, or is this for really everybody?
So Bobby, you're hitting your core market right on the head, because we're all leaders, whether we're a loan officer, whether we're a processor, whether we're whomever. In one aspect or another, we are a leader. Certainly in our family lives, we develop and we become leaders. And just to understand that, we all influence. If we are energy and you buy into that concept, that means energy is connected.
Mm-hmm.
So that means what I do will have an influence on some auditor with Fannie Mae in Dallas, Texas, even though I'm originating in Colorado. Or it's going to have a ripple effect to my underwriter in some other place.
Yeah. People don't understand how energy is so transmittable.
Correct.
That when you really study the science of energy,
Correct.
and you begin to understand that we are transmitting it just this podcast, when you look at this podcast and all the energy that we're using just to get this recorded and then out into the universe, and then people will go on to either YouTube or Spotify or whatever and listen to it, it's all a transfer of energy that's occurring. So what you're saying is really elementary of understanding, hey, if you're processing a file, your energy is going into that file. And I mean, am I right, or am I way off?
You are so on the money, dude. Bobby, great. I mean, that's the core of it. And that can be life-changing for any individual, because they can project out different energy than how maybe they're naturally wired right now. And we become wired from our DNA and element. That part's not easily determined, but also certainly our birth order, our family dynamics, how we were brought up, and then our external, our friends and situations that occur, that all creates who we are. And if we're struggling in life on certain aspects and we want to rewire our energy level, that's a process, because we all took time here on earth in that process to get where we are today. Mm-hmm. And to rewire ourselves is a whole process. It's certainly not a light switch. It doesn't happen in a week.
Yeah. I mean, I think over a period of time, and unfortunately, it always seems like something dramatic has to happen mm-hmm. for that paradigm shift to occur. Mm-hmm. And I always wonder, I always ask myself, like, why can't I just go through it peacefully? Why can't I just feel like happy and frolicking through some flowers and say, oh, okay, now I understand what the meaning of life. It has to be some kind of painful event for me to really uncover something more deeper within me. When we talk about energy, and I want to stay on this for a little bit longer, why is it so important to understand my energy level? And why is it so important for me to understand Bill's energy level? I mean, what is the significance of that?
So the first significance really becomes understanding your own energy, because once you understand your own energy, you by nature are going to understand other people's energy. And by that, though, too, you're going to be more effective in getting to resolution on issues in a common way and allow that team to continue moving forward. And that team could be certainly your children, too, could be your spouse, whatever aspect, but in the business world. And so as you understand that if you want to become the master in energy, understand the levels, understand your thought patterns of how you get there, understand your emotions that get triggered when you get there and your little behavior patterns. And then in turn, you can understand situationally what energy level to apply yourself at the moment. Because you don't have to always apply at the highest level.
Okay.
And so you can really apply energy very tactically not to benefit yourself, but to benefit your cause, to benefit your purpose. And we're here to help in home ownership. We're here to help people really experience home ownership at the best level into when they buy a house, and then also to be most prudent financially with the refis. And so now we want our team to really enhance how we do that, hit the most people out there with homeowners. It's the exact same concept. You're not
Yeah.
who gets helped in this process. Sure, financially, you're going to get well rewarded, but you're really focused on being purposeful and what you can do. And through that process and building an excellent culture, all based on energy, though, and applying that energy, because you might have part of your team, you might be, it's best to really go level 2 on this right now, this one issue, just to be done with it. Here's the only way to handle it. That way's wrong, this way's right. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah. So you don't always have to be at a 5 or a 6 in order to complete a project.
You want to know the energy levels and apply what's appropriate.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's such a great tidbit. So now let's say I'm at a level 2 one morning, or, my typical morning, by the way, when I'm normally at a 1, right? Because it takes a little while for me to get my head cleared, right? So I'm at a 1. Now, let's say I can't get my head cleared this particular day. And I walk into the office and I know I'm a 1. Should I avoid people up until I can kind of get a better mindset, or what should be the proper course at that point?
I think if you build a group, a team that understands energy, I think it's cool to always acknowledge and validate where you're at. And then I do think it's appropriate. It wouldn't be a frequent, but a once, twice, whatever time a year, that it would be appropriate to have a mental health day, and that I'm stuck at low energy right now today, and I've been stuck for all morning, and I'm still stuck. Maybe it's best just to have a mental health day and check out.
Yeah. Mental health has become more and more into the focus, and actually more into the mortgage industry in the last, I think, at least 18 months that I've been consciously aware of it. And it does seem like more and more people are acknowledging it. The more and more people are cognizant of it, and more people respect it.
Yeah.
So it's not a taboo like it was 20 some odd years ago when I got in the business.
Yeah, there's a few taboos that got blown out of the industry, Bobby, from when you got in and I got in. I got in a long time ago too.
Yeah, I think both of us got in a while ago. But listen, I want to end on this topic because I think a mutual friend of ours, Casey Cunningham from Zinix, we've had multiple conversations on this. And I think from what I'm hearing from you, this is really, this is exactly what I think is so dire, is we all agree that employee engagement is at an all-time low. Right? Employees are the engagement is just not there. Based on what you're talking about with the energy, transfer of energy and leadership through energy, no matter where you are, it feels like you could get a higher engagement from your employees by transferring the energy levels.
Absolutely. It is the number one core result you will get is a heightened of engagement.
Yeah. So when an employee is resistant to that kind of engagement, how does somebody say, hey, listen, Bill, I know that you have your own way of doing business. I want to try to talk more about taking the whole team up, and you're part of the team, and I want to raise us to the next level. Can you assist me? Or how would you go about doing that?
I'm actually was a part of designing a model to launch this within a company. And part of the model was really to systematize and use a system that allows tracking. And that's not the energy aspect, but then to bring the energy tool into it. It always, though, starts, in my view, top of the house. So if you're going to do a branch, or you're going to do a team, or you're going to do a region, top of the house needs to be bought in. Top of the house needs to be learning it and applying it themselves, and allow a waterfall, a cascade effect from it. And then it requires a continual discipline, because you will not in a week see all these dramatic results. It's going to be kind of like growing up in life. You're going to look back in 18 months and say, wow, where we're at today versus where we were 18 months, monumental.
Wow.
You didn't experience it daily.
So are you measuring that on a weekly basis or a quarterly basis? What's the best way to measure these kind of results?
I'm going to go off my gut on this. I don't have a statistical approach to provide a validated number off of that, but I would say on a 6-month basis.
Okay.
And I would say the energy approach to leadership or to performance, well, we'll take leadership out of the equation, I think takes at minimum a 1-year commitment.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, Bill, we are at the time that I try to wrap things up. I really, really appreciate this conversation. It was fascinating for me. I want to thank you for coming out here. I want to know, what is the best way some of our listeners could get a hold of you if they want to contact you and find out more about what you're doing?
Oh, sure, Bobby. The best way is to contact me. One, my email, bill@billbent.com, just my first and last name on the .com. And then by phone, text or call, 303-419-6539.
I'll make sure to put that on here so people can see it visually if they're watching it on YouTube. Hopefully they get on Spotify, they can figure out how to get to billbent.com. And that should be fine, and they can contact you from there. But once again, Bill, thank you so much for your time and your generosity with your wisdom. It was really, really insightful for me, and I'm sure my listeners will enjoy it as well. So thanks for taking the time for us today, Bill.
Thank you, Bobby. Have a great day.
You too, buddy.
We hope you enjoyed this edition of Laugh, Lend and Eat, the podcast. You can now enjoy Fabi Nagmi's article, Laugh, Lend and Eat, featured in the Vision magazine. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where each month we are giving away some swag for our lucky listener to show off. And remember, pass on a smile to someone today. It's totally free.